Okay, so let me try to do the introduction. All right. Welcome to Media Morsels, the podcast. Hold on.
This is going great. Oh, yeah.
I had this in my head earlier. Welcome to Media Morsels, the podcast about creativity and the ways in the media that feeds it. I think that's it. Welcome to Media Morsels, a podcast about creativity and the media that feeds it. I'm Jessica Linkhart.
I'm Jamie Sykes.
And I'm Mitch Lewis.
And we are a team of creatives that really love all kinds of different media. Movies, TV shows, books, games, music, you name it. And this is where we're going to sit down and discuss the media that made us, because all artists really have both those formative works that inform the types of things that they create and have media that is presently, like both in the past and in the present, is feeding our, I guess, creative engines. So, yeah.
So how do you want to kick us off here?
Okay, so every episode is going to be broken into 3 courses. So each week we will pick a piece of media, like a movie or a TV show or a book, to discuss. And for that week's episode, we will break this media morsel down into 3 courses. The first course is the appetizer round, where we just kind of give a spoiler-free overview of the media that we consumed that week. The second course is the main course, where we really dig into the meat of the piece and really kind of go into its inner workings and talk about the things that we noticed and that we really enjoyed, or maybe didn't enjoy. And then the last course is the dessert course, where we kind of talk about how that piece of media formed us in the past, like informed our creative process, and how it continues to inform us today.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah, so for this inaugural episode of Media Morsels, we watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer 1992, the movie, which most people, in my experience, don't know that Buffy the Vampire Slayer, obviously Buffy the Vampire Slayer is highly recognizable. As a TV show, it was this huge, and continues to be this huge pop cultural thing. But not many people know that it was a movie before it became a TV show. And that was actually the version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that I grew up with. I didn't watch the TV show until I was in my mid to late 20s.
And then you watched all of it all at once.
And then I watched all of it all at once and became super obsessed with it, and still to this day am, and we will talk about that in another
sure.
Media Morsels at some point.
I certainly didn't know that this was a movie first. And I was vaguely aware of the existence of the show growing up, in the same way that I was sort of vaguely aware of Charmed and the other shows that sort of occupied a similar area, where maybe I watched an episode or 2 as I accidentally happened across them. But I didn't see the movie until I started dating you, which is true of a lot of the weird movies that we will be talking about.
Yes.
So about me, I honestly didn't I wasn't even aware of any of this at all, to be frank. I had heard the title Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I honestly had no idea what it was about.
Either the movie or the show?
Yeah, both of them, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's clearly about vampire slayers, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's about all I ever know. It's just okay, this is a thing, I guess.
Yeah. Until Panda, probably.
Yeah.
And then you got
and
an earful.
This is a thing. Okay, all right.
Yeah. Actually, before we kind of launch into the appetizer round, I think we should probably talk about ourselves as creatives, because, this is a podcast.
That's the whole idea.
Yeah, that by a group of creatives. And when I say creatives, I mean, I don't know, just people who enjoy this kind of thing. Because between the 3 of us and the guests that we will probably have in coming episodes, there's a few of us that have kind of made a career out of our creative pursuits, but also a couple of us, or many of us, it's a hobby. And that still counts. So for me, I'm Jessica Linkhart. I am a writer and also the writer and creator and producer and so many other things of the podcast, The Harrowing of Minerva Damson.
Link in the show notes.
Yeah, link in the show notes. So I'm sort of like, at this point, a career creative.
Mitch Lewis. I am a graphic designer. I actually work for Jessica in making a lot of the podcasts, like artwork as well as, iconography. And I've been doing this for about 10, 12 years now, something like that.
Yeah.
And also your day job is also graphic
Oh,
design.
yeah,
Yes.
I forgot about that. That's also how I actually make bank.
Yes.
And pay the bills.
And this is Jamie here, and my day job is completely unrelated to the creative field. I work in biotech, I write contracts, but I have been a hobby creative of varying stripes for a very long time. I am a voice actor that assists on the Harrowing podcast. I'm also working on some writing projects that may also gain life in the course of our podcast making. So yeah, I just have my finger in a little bit of everything.
What he means to say is he is a true Renaissance man, because this man can do nearly anything.
Okay, so this guy makes, costumes on a daily basis. He just,
Yeah,
it's
costuming,
frustrating.
Miniatures. You built a
the
passable
sound
booth
Yeah.
for...
Not even that. He built a medieval style wagon to sell
pushcart.
his random crap out of.
His very, very skillfully done crap.
The period accurate nun outfits for the
Harrowing of Minerva
Harrowing,
Damson.
promo thing,
Yes. Yeah. So he does a little bit of everything, and there's very little, I think, that intimidates him to try creatively. So
creatively,
well, and
yeah.
and
I
also
have an anxiety disorder, but
and also he is also a writer, and has sort of a manuscript sitting on the back burner. So
who doesn't?
and
He has a few.
And so many more sort of simmering in the background there. But yes, that is us as a team of creatives. We'll probably also have guests on for some of our episodes. And we will introduce them and what they do, obviously, when they
make their appearance.
When
When
make
they're
their
invited to
debut.
dinner.
Yes,
Yeah.
when they're invited to dinner.
Oh man, we're gonna have to buy new china and stuff, aren't we?
We have leftover wedding china
Only
we
the
can pull
finest
from.
china for this swill.
All right, let me get the paper plates.
Wait, did we just get our first tagline? Only the finest china for this swill.
I don't know, because does that make sense? Is swill
Yes.
is usually
No, it's good.
is
good?
it's usually liquid.
Yeah, fine china.
Okay, I think of plates and stuff.
We're cutting this.
Are we? I think this sums up our dynamic very
That's
nicely.
true. I'm not the audio editor.
You don't cut any of the appetizer.
Yeah,
Well,
we're not
speaking-
even to the appetizer
But
yet.
speaking of the appetizer, should we get into it?
Yeah, why not?
All right, tuck in your napkins, kids. Okay, so I've been tasked with summarizing this week. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer is what it sounds like. It's about a young girl named Buffy who's a vampire slayer. It very much leans into the just a regular popular girl. She's on the cheer team, and suddenly she's exposed to this wild, magical other world that has been kind of simmering in her California town.
Well, and also in her subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
because she has these dreams of past lives.
And suddenly it becomes relevant because vampires arrive in California, along with her fated mentor companion that has been following her through all of her reincarnations. And the movie follows this wild dynamic of extreme Valley Girl, extreme early 90s fashion, comedy, action, horror?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if you could really call it horror, though.
I mean, yeah, it barely gets into horror in that there are vampires and they kill people, but it's never scary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very,
This is
very
very
campy.
accessible.
Yes, very accessible, very campy. also has a lot of surprisingly big names.
Yes. So you have Rutger Hauer as Dime Store Dracula. Donald Sutherland is Wise Mentor Guy. Kristen Swanson was the Buffy here.
Yes.
And she may have been a big name in her day, but unfortunately we didn't see a lot of work from her after this.
that.
Even though her performance in here, I would say, carries the entire movie.
Yeah, you have...
Baby Ben Affleck.
Yeah,
baby...
as a random cameo basketball player.
Yeah.
He has, like, maybe one line.
Yeah.
And then there's Hilary Swank in a
Yes.
completely off-type casting as
Yes.
a ditzy mean girl.
Yes, and Luke Perry as Pike, who becomes Buffy's,
Boo.
well, you know, boo and helper, just sort of her, like, wingman in a way.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Written by Joss Whedon, who also wrote and directed the Buffy show. However, the movie was produced by a different set of hands, and it shows.
and it was directed by a woman, I
Yeah.
believe. And, you know, Joss Whedon, for anybody who knows anything about Joss Whedon, his legacy is great, but as a person, he is not great. So
He's a shit.
we are not, we're gonna try not to get in the weeds about that and just focus
The
on
weeds describing the Whedon.
yeah. we're gonna try not to get in the Whedons about that. What we're going to try to do instead is just talk about our reaction
Yeah.
to the art that he had a hand in creating. So that's the brief sort of appetizer overview. It is a very fun movie. And it is
watchable.
and it is like, I don't know. Again, I'll just say it's very campy.
Yeah. Fair warning, dear listeners. This movie is stupid. It's also excellent.
Yes. And very, very cheesy.
Yeah, very of the time, 1992, neon, popcorn, glossy.
But like all the everybody's costuming was just so.
I mean, yeah.
peak during
Half
that,
the
though.
reason that I watch this movie, well, I don't know about half. Like a good part of the reason that I watch this movie is for the just peak 90s.
I mean, it's Clueless with vampires.
Yeah, it's Clueless with vampires, including, like, fashion-wise, which, what's not to love? Don't you wish that Clueless had more vampires?
I know I do.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into the main course where we, like, really dig in and talk about the movie. So if you haven't seen the movie, pause this, go watch it, come back. Don't worry, we'll be waiting here. We'll save you a seat. And if you have watched it, this is where we really dig into it.
Yeah, pull up a chair.
Join us at the table.
We have a placemat for you.
Okay.
Where to begin?
Where even to begin? Where even to begin?
I mean, begin at the beginning.
Because part of me is just thinking, like, about how this movie is so frickin' quotable.
Oh, yeah.
Like, as far as, I think every family has its, well, I mean, essentially,
it's meme
its own
movies.
meme movies. The inside, you know, its own inside jokes. The things that you just, like, parrot to each other. And this one has so many quotable,
Yes.
so many useful inside jokes and memes. My favorite being when, like, the main vampire, whose name is Lothos,
Who is in a Party City Dracula cape.
who is indeed in, like, the lowest budget Dracula
You
cape.
can see the sheen of the polyester.
Yeah, he's supposed to be, like, the big bad, like, the most powerful vampire that there is. And he's wearing fucking Party City.
He's
costume.
JCPenney Dracula.
He's JCPenney Dracula. His, like, main mook, squeeze, we don't know. His main...
Right-hand man.
Right-hand man.
That look.
His main, like, right-hand man, like, loses his arm in this crazy...
Is it his right arm or his left arm?
I
that
think
he
it
got?
was his...
It's his left arm. Yeah.
Is it his left
he's still,
arm?
So he's still the right
right-hand
arm
the
man.
right-hand man. So, you know, in this crazy action sequence, this main mook loses his arm, and he looks at Pike, and he's like, "You ruined my new jacket. Kill him a lot."
Kill him a lot.
And kill him a lot is something that we use a lot.
And also later, this Mook ends up, dying in the final act, because of course he does. That always happens to the second in command for the bad guy. But he gets the best death sequence in cinematic history. Because Buffy stakes him, and he goes, collapses out of frame. And then a second later, pops back into frame, and then side-eyes his boss to, check if he's supposed to be dying, I think.
Yeah.
And the boss is just sitting there with a violin, just
looking amused.
And just continues playing.
And, I don't think this was supposed to happen. I just think this guy ad-libbed it, and for some reason they decided, because there were so many choices that they made with this movie.
We could talk a lot about the acting choices in this film, and this is one of the best ones, I think.
And they kept it. They just went with it.
So then he drops out of frame again, and the camera follows him and starts writhing on the floor, continuing to moan and groan until eventually silence. And you think that's it, but then in the post-credits, he's continuing to die 20 minutes later. It's the best thing.
So, aside from that, I think maybe where we should start is, honestly, this is a surprisingly feminist movie.
It really is.
I think we should probably give a more, perhaps, a succinct, but still, spoilers version of the Appetizer
fully
round.
spoilered at this rate.
So, in this movie, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy is sort of a mean girl, valley girl who just, is kind of living her, what on the surface appears to be charmed life, but underneath is very, empty, and her parents are very absent, and she clearly longs for some kind of deeper connection.
And all of her friends suck.
And all of her friends suck. But she doesn't really know anything else at this point, so she's just kind of going along with it.
And her boyfriend sucks.
Yeah, her boyfriend really sucks. But then along comes this guy, this British guy, who
first confronts her.
Who first confronts
and her friends in the mall by holding the elevator door.
Yeah, and he's wearing a trench coat and a fedora.
And he looks exceptionally just sleazy.
Super sleazy.
Honestly, the movie's treatment of this guy, when he just sort of shows up, is really appropriate. Because it treats him as exactly as sketchy as he seems.
Yeah. And by the way, he's played by Donald Sutherland. So, and his name is Merrick. And he's what in the TV show would be called her watcher, but there's some really distinct differences between him and the watchers of the TV show, which we'll probably get into later. But he shows up looking for Buffy. He's finally found her.
And he announces it in the creepiest way possible.
He really does. He shows up in her gym.
At the high school.
After practice when it's just her. Mm-hmm. And he announces that he's there to deliver her birthright, and she must come with him to the graveyard. And Buffy very sensibly is
no thanks.
What?
No police.
But then he mentions that he's you dream that you're someone else sometimes, and basically describes some of her dreams that are actually past lives.
In specific detail that she has not told anyone else.
Yes. And so she finally believes him. She goes to the graveyard with him. They get attacked. And thus begins her sort of initiation and awakening.
And girl boss training montage.
Yes.
And mind you, all of this girl boss training montage is still within the cheerleading outfit that she put on just that day.
Yes.
The hot pink tights, the not neoprene. What's that
Spandex?
Parachute pants material?
I don't know.
I don't know. The crinkly polyester. It's every 80s, 90s workout video.
She gets the training montage that usually is reserved for male heroes, right? Action heroes. And there's this really good scene where Merrick is trying to convince her that she is the chosen one, and confronts her in the girls' locker room once again.
Being
the
a massive
creepiest
creeper.
thing.
This is a naked place.
Yeah,
another excellent quote.
Another excellent quote. What are you doing here? This is a naked place. And there's this wonderful confrontation she has with him there that we'll get back to because I want to talk about it in more detail. In the meantime, there's this sort of pair of guys Pike and his friend, Dave, who is played by David Arquette. So Luke Perry and David Arquette are these sort of, they're high school graduates. They probably, I don't think they're in college or anything. They just are like
No,
working
they're just a couple of random losers.
Yeah, essentially. They don't really have any direction. And obviously like very broken stuff. And they run across Buffy and her crew a couple of times. But somewhere during the course of all of this, David Arquette's character gets turned into a vampire, and Luke Perry's character, Pike, is also sort of exposed to this, like, world of vampire when David Arquette shows up and tries to, like, turn him into a vampire.
Okay, but more importantly, they are both drinking on what is probably, like, whatever the town equivalent is of Lover's Lane. Mm-hmm. They're both absolutely wasted. David Arquette gets, like, hoisted off of the median that they're sitting on, and in this exact same moment, Merrick shows up and, like, fireman carries Pike into, like, a car, I want to say?
Yeah.
And just bundles him away, like, I will rescue you, stupid child.
Yeah, he's like, okay. So he just, like, looks at David Arquette, who's, like, gone, and he's like, can't do anything about that one, just gotta grab this one.
Yep.
So, fun thing I noticed, like, on my second viewing or whatever, for David Arquette's character, like, he initially has, like, his canine is a golden tooth, like, just normal or whatever. And then, like, fast forward to whenever he's a vampire, he still has that gold canine tooth, but now it's a vampire tooth.
Yeah, he has a gold fang as a vampire.
Cute little gold fang. Mm-hmm. But their paths, Buffy and Pike and Merrick's paths, all kind of cross during this crazy action scene where these vampires are chasing Pike, and he's, like, driving a car, and he
wrecks his shitty van.
Mm-hmm. As he's trying to get out of town because he's like, excuse me, Benny, that's his name, David Arquette's character, Benny, is a vampire, so he's trying to get the fuck out of Dodge. Mm-hmm. Like any sensible person would. Mm-hmm. So their paths cross, and by this point, like, Buffy is
several stakes in. She is downed multiple vampires at this point.
Yeah, it's only been a few weeks, but she is, quickly becoming proficient at slaying vampires. But this is, of course, completely changed her worldview. Mm-hmm. She's just like, the things that I thought were really important aren't important. Like, all these dances and all this, like, these, fashion and all this other stuff. It's just like, this is all, she kind of begins to see sort of like the shallowness of her world. Not that those things in and of themselves are just, are like useless, but rather that was her whole world and there's so much more. Mm-hmm. And also that she's like risking her life every night. And she's seeing how many people are being killed by these vampires, and yet, like, the LA news media and her friends they'll hear about this stuff, but they just do not care.
Another very quotable moment in this movie is from the LA news media. Because during one part of the movie, they use the excellent device of having the news anchor basically read out the background plot in the foreground. And the anchor describes a body being found with a really gross hickey.
Yeah. Eventually, though, Buffy has her first confrontation with Lothos.
It goes poorly.
Merrick, who, she spent all his time with, who is probably the first adult in her life who has actually sort of taken an interest in her. And even though he's, it's not like a perfect sort of parental relationship, he is invested in her,
and he's better than what she's got.
Merrick gets killed in this encounter with Lothos, and this is a huge turning point for Buffy. It's just like the low point. She's completely alienated from her friends. The adult that has been trying to, I guess, like, train her and prepare her for this, and who has been spending time with her, is dead.
Her friends have ditched her because she hasn't been showing up to anything.
Yeah.
Her boyfriend has dumped her for the same reason.
Yeah, she hasn't been seeing her boyfriend, and she kind of wants to return to how things were. And so she decides to go to this school dance, and she and Pike have a disagreement over it. But eventually, like, she does go. Pike shows up in this, like, I guess, sort of, 90s glow up. He, like, shaves off his tiny little goatee, and that's supposed to be, like, the mark of maturity or something.
Which, dear viewer, It is. The tiny little swipe of the straight razor that got rid of the soul patch he had been rocking up until that point was in fact an upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Was it?
He got
soul patch bad. A tiny little quarter-sized bit of facial
That wasn't
hair.
even a quarter. That was a dime.
I don't know. I thought it was okay.
No.
Anyway, so, and then, of course, vampires attack the school dance, and she has her second real confrontation with Lothos, and she defeats him, and she and Pike, long story short, she and Pike ride off into the sunrise together on, like, his tiny little...
moped thing.
Yeah, like, motorcycle thing.
It was a dirt bike.
Yeah, dirt bike thing. So that's kind of like the big overview. I think that this is actually a pretty feminist movie. One of the things I really enjoyed watching was Buffy's character development, which, again, like, this is a really campy, cheesy, funny movie. So, like, don't expect it to be too deep. But you can tell at the beginning, she's got this whole, like, mean girl attitude, this valley girl attitude, but when her boyfriend is pawing at her and her parents are just not paying attention to her, you can tell that she doesn't like the role that she's in, but she doesn't really know how like, what else there is. And her boyfriend and his friends, like, literally treat her like an object and a commodity. And
like a piece of meat. Like, hey, can I borrow her?
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
Hands off my girl.
Hands off my thing is what he says.
Yeah,
it's not even girl.
Hands off my thing.
And over the course of the movie, even though, of course, there's this, really, like, shocking initiation into this world where she's, like, risking her life every night to kill vampires, she also is empowered. Like, Merrick starts training her, and that training helps her feel like she has more power and control in her life, and shows her that she can be something different. I'm trying to think of how to even, like, talk about, like, the scene where Merrick is in the women's locker room and he throws the knife at her and she's like, what the fuck?
Okay, so I can set the scene here where Buffy is making her first attempt to reject this new weird supernatural life and return to being a cheerleader. And she's like, okay, I'm just done. I'm done. I want to stop. Or
rather, this is, like, pretty early because she's like, yeah, okay, vampires are, like, real, but what does that have to do with me? Like, I'm the chosen one? Okay, go choose somebody else.
Yeah, and Merrick makes a big show of feigning disappointment and swanning out of the locker room. And when Buffy turns her back, he literally twirls his mustache and then yeets a dagger at her face. Which she handily catches because she has super special Slayer
superhuman reflexes.
But she doesn't know that.
And threw a knife
at my head.
Yeah. Another very quotable line. And Buffy is rightly outraged by this because this is like the third or fourth time that he has endangered her life without telling her what the terms were.
Yeah.
That's like a routine thing. And so he's like, oh, well, I had to
show
do
you.
this. I had to show you. I had to, like, test you. Of course you're the Slayer, now that I've seen this. And she just decks him square in the schnoz. And this is the first...
After, like, plunging the dagger into the bench that he's sitting on right between his legs. Like,
she decks him square in the schnoz. And in the first movie display of her super strength... he scoots back on that bench like a good 4 or 5 feet. And she's like, wow, I've never hit anybody before. And he's, cuffing his nose like, well, you did it perfectly.
And then, like,
I didn't even break a nail.
Yeah. And she's like, wow,
violence is fun.
Violence is fun. Not only did I, like, defend myself perfectly, but I did it without...
sacrificing my femininity.
Yeah, essentially that.
Yeah.
I can do it with style.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, like, that is actually a good theme and, like, a constant refrain. It's like, what makes Buffy different? She's like, well, those other girls that died as Slayers, they weren't like me. I'm doing everything with style. It's my keen fashion sense is sort of like the joking refrain.
And it's actually kind of interesting because there's a lot of that, like, that phrase keeps coming up over and over again.
Keen fashion sense.
No, not my keen fashion sense.
I mean, that comes up twice, though, yeah.
Yes, but What I'm talking about is I'm not like the other girls, or you're not like other... I am like the other girls, or you're not like other girls. There's a lot of this discussion happening around femininity and like her relationship to other girls. And I kind of feel like, you know, this was sort of a step forward.
Well, there's a feminist read here because she keeps being told how she's exceptional, that she's different, but
at the very last,
like,
more or less last scene with Pike, whatever, he's like, hey, you're not like any other girl. And then she's like, yes, I am.
So there's like a few different reads of when Pike says, you know, you're not like other girls. And she says, yes, I am. And all of them are really great. I think the first one is, yes, I am. I am like other girls. I am feminine. You know, her like sort of staking out that I don't have to I can be all these things. I can be like strong and athletic and capable and all those other things. And in charge. She, even despite having things that are traditionally associated with men, like this super strength and this sort of action hero role, she refuses to like relinquish her femininity, right? She's like,
it's still important to her.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
I'm still like, also perhaps critically, I'm still a person because like whenever like a guy says like, you're not like other girls, often it's like putting somebody on a pedestal and sort of almost like dehumanizing in a way, because it's like you're this other
you're an
being.
Object to be desired.
Yeah. And she's like, no, I'm not. I am like other girls. I like all the other things that girls like, and I'm not going to let this strip me of those things.
May I take a guess on what your second read is? Sort of the inverse. Like, yes, I am like other girls. Another girl might be capable of doing this. I'm not that special.
Yeah, like, actually, if any other girl given this, like, these powers would be like me. So all women are like this. We're all strong and capable of slaying, literally and figuratively.
I mean,
with her fashion sense or without it.
Yeah, like, I would argue that that's like the emotional climax of the movie.
Yes,
so you
I
have
think
you have the action climax and the plot climax, which is, you know, the final battle with JCPenney Dracula. Because that's when all the plot problems get solved. But the emotional through line is resolved in that moment.
In like the dance, when she and Pike dance together.
Because she's been struggling to fit the two disparate parts of her life together the entire movie.
Well, and it's also, you know, he's this clearly working class man, and she's from like a very privileged position. And before, he was just totally
beneath her notice.
Yeah, she wasn't going to give him the time of day. And he thought that she was just like a flake. But in this moment is kind of where those two things like cease to matter. And like, I'm just going to give Pike a shout out, because like Pike is a great sidekick. And also there's this interesting interplay between him and his friend Benny. His friend Benny is a fucking incel. Which, you know, if you don't know what that is, it stands for an involuntary celibate. And those are like the kinds of guys who are like, why won't
you sleep with me? I'm a nice guy.
Yeah, I'm a nice... I, by virtue of being a man, have a right to your body. And, like, why won't you just open your legs for me?
Yeah, why don't you just put out?
Why, if I put nice points in, don't sex come out like a vending machine? Like, he's that kind of guy where he, like... Literally in the movie, he says they're not even human, but he would totally have sex with them.
Later on, when he's like fully vamped out and crashing the senior dance, he's like, look at all those bitches run.
Yeah, finally got him on the run. But Pike, as sort of a counterpoint to this, whenever like Benny is saying all this stuff, he's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, he's sort of pointing out the hypocrisy of what he's saying. And when he is put in a position where he is interacting with Buffy, he is totally okay with being the wingman. He is not threatened by her strength at all. In fact,
competence.
In her strength or her competence, In fact,
he's kind of into it.
Yeah, he's way into it. And so when Buffy is basically having her identity crisis and she shows up at the dance, he comes to the dance too, but he also comes prepared just in case anything goes down. And he brings like a whole bunch of steaks for her. And whenever the vampires show up, he's just like, haha, hey babe, I brought some steaks for you to slay with. Yeah. And she like goes and does her thing.
What's even cuter is, like, the vamps all show up in a drove. They break down the front door. They kind of ham it up whenever they're in front of it. They're like, ha! And, like, she positions herself in front of Pike.
Yeah.
And, like, stances up. And he's like,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. He's like, hey.
Like, so he has exactly one shitty moment where Buffy's like, no, I want to go to the dance. This sucks. My mentor just died. I need a moment to feel normal.
Yeah.
And he thinks it's ridiculous. He thinks that she's losing perspective.
And he does say some, like, hurtful shit, but then he comes back and he makes up for it. You know what I'm saying? So, like, so he, like, I do think there's this, I don't know if Joss Whedon intended to set this up. I would like to think that maybe, like, maybe somehow he did. But
or maybe it was the collaborator's hand.
Or maybe it was the collaborator's hand or the director's, but there is two different kinds of masculinity here. Mm-hmm. And also, one of the things I thought was really interesting is in the movie, Buffy's sort of like vampire sense, it isn't like sort of a tingly sensation as it might be in the show, which I can't even remember if it's ever described how she senses vampires, because they kind of leave off that point pretty quick in the show. But in the movies, her sense at first is like a real bummer, because like basically the way that she senses vampires is she gets cramps. Like really bad, and that's like her indication system. It's super not sexy, which is probably why they did away with it in the show. But in the movie, it's kind of interesting that they decide to make it period cramps, or feel like cramps, because it takes something that is normally it tends to be associated with
people with uteruses,
which traditionally has been female,
equated with
being a woman. And more specifically, it is like equated with being inferior or unclean or like gross, or and something shameful. And it takes that and it makes it an integral, useful part of her sacred duty skill set.
Yeah.
And it's unconventional, but I actually thought that was really interesting.
Well, and, when Merrick explains this, Buffy's, kind of incredulous. Like,
she's
great,
like,
my superpower's cramps.
Well, and she also doesn't want to talk about it first, because he asks, like, very matter-of-factly, when they first go into the graveyard.
She's having this reaction.
Yeah, he's like, oh, have cramps? And she's like, like, she's like, ew, rude. Like, don't ask me about that. And, which is kind of interesting, because I feel like culturally we've moved on to a point where that's not as like taboo, but clearly in the early 90s it was still
there's still plenty of people who would be outraged by that.
There are, but I think there's less.
Yeah.
I think at this point though, in the 90s, that was still very like, ugh.
We were just coming out of the Reagan 80s still, are you kidding?
Yeah. But I think that's a pretty good segue into like the differences between the movie and the show, if you've ever seen the show, which more people will have seen the show than the movies.
Yes.
Than the movie.
And I acknowledge you as the scholar of the show.
Yeah.
But would you mind if I like summarize my observations from my limited experience?
Yes, but first I want to give some context first. So Joss Whedon wrote both the movie and the show, but the reason why he even went onto the show in the first place was because somewhere along the production of the movie, like, he was only the writer of that movie, so he actually didn't have a lot of creative control once his script got into the hands of other people. And he was really, really unhappy with how they brought his vision to life. He thought they totally ruined it. And I'm not really sure the specifics of what the problem was. But whatever it was, he was absolutely livid about it. And it's interesting because when you watch the movie, you can really see Joss Whedon's hand all over it in the dialogue in particular.
It's very Whedon-esque dialogue. It's all very quippy and funny.
But the way that it is shot is clearly...
The framing.
Yeah, the framing is clearly not very Whedon. There's also some, like, I will say, some, like, weird pacing issues.
Yes.
And I don't know, I do think maybe some of the choices that he was unhappy with, like, some of them I can see why. Looking between the show and the movie and just trying to, like, draw some conclusions, I can see why he would be upset. Like, the vampires in the show are very monstrous. But in the movie, it's just like they have weird kind of crinkly ears and, like sharp teeth.
They were very clearly working with a very low budget.
They were working with a low budget, and they decided to lean really hard into the camp, and I think that maybe that might not have been what he wanted. So he got so upset about it that eventually his wife at the time was like, you know, honey, this really mattered to you. Maybe you should try to pitch it as a TV show. And that's what he did. And they got the gig, and then the TV version of it was born.
And so I went through Jess's binge watch of the entire show, and I was not there start to finish, but I did stick with the first 3 seasons, I think.
Well, and maybe some of season 4.
Yeah. But that does mean I probably saw the parts of the show where it bridged with the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this interesting thing where, like, you know, in the movie, Buffy is a senior. She's getting ready to graduate. Like, she is on the cusp of legal adulthood. But in the show, they rewind her back to, I want to say, a sophomore?
Yeah, she was a sophomore.
Which I can see why that would be, because it gives you multiple seasons of high school antics.
And they were also, like, that was the audience, was high school kids.
Yeah. But it's sort of this awkward thing, because there's implied to be some continuity between the movie and the show. Because Buffy moved away from LA to Sunnydale?
To Sunnydale,
because of everything that happened at that dance.
Yeah.
Except Pike's no longer in the picture or mentioned, so he kind of got written out, which I would say is more for the worse, because he's better than all the other Buffy love interests, in my opinion.
So Pike got the shaft?
Pike got the shaft. And I know Jess is going to have some opinions about Buffy's lovers, but...
I have many. Like, I don't think that there's almost anybody who watches the show who doesn't have a strong opinion about Buffy's lovers. Although I will say that I really do like Pike. Like, Pike is my second, like, honestly, interchangeably between first and second. Yeah. It's just that my first has, like, way more screen time.
That's
so.
Right. But let it be said that we all hate Angel in this house.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to, you know, people who love Angel out there.
I'm not sorry.
But this is a household of not Bengal shippers, so
so yeah, there's this like weird relationship of continuity. I feel like the real only true through line is Buffy's personality is pretty similar between movie and show. She does get to be the sort of peppy valley girl. She is into all of her feminine interests and getting dressed up and also kicking ass.
I would argue that the aesthetics of Buffy are similar, but I think that her core is quite different.
That's fair.
In fact,
the surface level things are all
I feel like what happened, and this happened with several of the characters that show up in the TV show. I think Cordelia, if you put like Cordelia and TV show Buffy together, you would get movie Buffy.
Yeah. I could see it, yeah.
And Pike, Xander is kind of like a less mature version of Pike. Cassandra, which only, like, she's a sort of a bit character in the movie. She's sort of the, like, nerd that the popular girls are working with to try to figure stuff out for the dance. Mm-hmm. You can kind of see maybe a connection. Willow. Yeah, like a proto-Willow. You know, Merrick is very obviously the proto-Giles.
Yes. Even down to being British and weird.
And stuffy.
Yeah.
But, like... And this is another, like, okay, so there's a lot of, like, really interesting and critical differences between the movie and the show. One is, in the movie, Merrick is, I guess, like, you know, he trains Slayers, but he is a single entity whose job that is, and he
kind of reincarnates in parallel with the Slayers.
Yeah, he reincarnates with the Slayer. And Buffy, it's not like in the TV show where, like, there's all these different girls, but they're clearly, like, they all have individual souls, right? It's like the Slayer essence passes from one to the next. When one dies, immediately another is called. In this version of events in the movie, it seems like when one dies, it's like to every generation a Slayer is born.
It's
so
like,
there is a
It's like
gap.
the Avatar from the last Airbender series.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, there is a gap. There is, like, a period of time where there is no Slayer. So, like, the whole Watcher thing is very different between the movie and the show. There's also, like, a lot of things in the movie that I wish they had carried over more in the show. In the show, Buffy does have, in the first few seasons, she has Slayer dreams, but then it just kind of goes away. In the show, those Slayer dreams tend to be, like, really weird, abstract, like, prophecies of things to come, which doesn't really happen so much in the movie. In the movie,
it's all retrospective.
It's all retrospective. And I think it would have been interesting, too, because, like, that has really interesting implications of, like, theoretically, every generation of Slayer should be getting, like, stronger and stronger, like, in the movie's particular canon, because she's having all these memories from all her past lives and learning from all those mistakes, which is why she can pick up all this training super fast.
And catch a knife out of the air.
Yeah, like, it's very similar to how it happens in Assassin's Creed, where, you know, you go through your ancestors' memories and you gather all these stuff, and it's called the bleeding effect. And, like, every ancestor's lives bleed into the next, and you just get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, and that clearly doesn't happen in the TV show. It's very different. So the Slayer dreams is something that they kind of, like, dropped the ball on, I think. I think that would have been really cool to utilize.
Yeah.
In the show.
The gymnastics angle.
The gymnastics angle, yeah. Like, in the movie, Buffy's a cheerleader, but she's also, like, she does a lot of tumbling and gymnastics. And I think, like, in the first season of the TV show, she does some acrobatic stuff, which is really cool. And then they just kind of drop it. And then she's just sort of like a, you know, blunt instrument.
A bruiser.
I just had a thought. I feel like that this premise would be a very good premise for a cartoon, you know, except change up a few things, you make her into a spy, and then, hey, oh wait, that's just Kim Possible.
Yeah, you know, take out the supernatural elements and you end up with Kim Possible.
Yeah, basically. But there's a few things that get lost in translation between the movie and the TV shows. And the TV show has its own virtues. So I'm over here making these connections, right? But I kind of see them as two distinct. I can see them as related, but also two distinct entities, and probably because I grew up with the movie and didn't come to the TV show until later. So it's, like, easy for me to sort of take those boxes in my mind and appreciate each of them for what they are. But one thing that's definitely very similar between the movie and the first few seasons of Buffy is the first few seasons of Buffy are, like, really funny. Oh, yeah. They are, like, comically ridiculous.
Well, the high school antics are still in full swing.
Yes. And yeah, this movie is also just the antics are high. I don't know, like, also just gonna say, talk about another, like, parallel between the movie and the TV show. Like, in the first season, Buffy has to face the Master, which is clearly sort of like an evolution of Lothos. And I mean, the Master was pretty hammy too, but there's some pretty significant divergences there.
Rutger Hauer made some acting choices, and I applaud him for it.
Yeah, there's clearly a connection between him and the Slayer that is never fully explained.
Well, yeah, that's okay. So I'll go ahead and say I prefer the movie to the show, personally, because the movie is full-on camp. And the first couple of seasons of the show are also full-on camp, but it does start to lose that as it progresses. And I miss that.
It morphs and changes, which I actually appreciate how its themes aged with the characters.
Yeah, and there's definitely an argument in favor there. But one thing that really does bug the crap out of me about the movie is that, you know, they're teasing this sort of, like, deep connection between Buffy and the Master Vampire Lothos. And it's like, oh, you know, we're meant for each other. She's not ready yet. And it's like, it's never explained meant for what, ready for what.
Well, and he says, like, in the final confrontation, like, you and I are, like, destined. You know, I could never hurt you while he's hurting her.
Yeah, so it's like, are you destined to be my vampire queen? Like, I feel like that's a read there.
Are you just, like, is this just a cycle of life and death that you guys are, like, locked in? And he sees this as a sort of, like, poetic...
conclusion to...
a poetic cycle. Speaking of, like, not only is he just wearing, like, the hammiest outfits, but he also, in the final scene, like, runs in, and somehow he has a fucking katana, and that's what he pulls out. He's like, wah! Like, yeah. I'm like, where did this katana come from, and why are you fighting with a katana? What? How? Like, you do see at the very beginning of the movie, like, he is, like, a medieval man, like, he's a medieval vampire, and she's, like, a medieval barmaid, and, like, he's fighting her, and I'm like, so, I don't know, in my mind, it would make more sense if he had, like, a crusader sword or something like that. Yeah, like, but no, it's a katana.
At one point in your many years of life, did you happen upon a mall ninja katana?
Yeah, why are you fighting mall?
He definitely got it from Benny.
Oh, like, well, yes.
It's like you had... Oh my... I don't know, like...
Okay, so at one point he emerges from a coffin that I can only describe as, like... If you have seen Christmas Vacation, and you've seen, like, the yuppie couple with the extremely, like, minimalist, stylish for the late 1980s apartment... Like, it's all sleek lines and looks like it was built for a shopping mall. Like, it's this sterile little box of a coffin with a red uplight coming out of it, and he is just swanning out of this coffin in fantastic fashion.
It is really something, but I'm like, for someone who has lived thousands of years, your sense of fashion is just absolute shit.
Oh, yeah.
You have your, like, Party City, like, Dracula robes, and a mall ninja katana. Surely you have better things lying around.
Shirt.
Yeah, these, you know, like, polyester sort of satiny gloves. Mm-hmm. I'm like, surely you have better things in storage somewhere, right? Like...
So, like, okay, I have a scale of how hammy things are typically.
Oh yeah, let's give your ham rating.
Yeah, ham rating. Okay, so from 1 being like Count of Monte Cristo, like levels of drama and just to a level 10, which is Army of Darkness, I would give this one probably a 9.
Yeah. It's pretty up there.
Yeah, the ham-o-meter.
Just like, okay, so going back a little bit towards, you know, near the middle, and it's Pike's, like, busted-ass van, and he's trying to get the thing started, and so you see, you know, a couple of vampires standing up, and they're like, "Wah!"
Yeah, they're all, like, constantly standing around, like, being like, "Ah!" Yeah. But not really doing anything.
They're attacking one at a time.
There wasn't any good, like,
they're not attacking
fight choreography.
They're attacking the scenery and by chewing on it. And, like, so the right-hand man just, like, hanging on this van and just, like, staring into the windshield at Pike, just like, "Ah!" with, like, this goofiest fucking grin on his face.
And that's all of them. That's all the vampires, like, all the time.
And this scene lasts for...
It's an extended sequence of him, like, surfing on top of the van.
Like, "Ah!"
And then getting knocked off the top of the van.
They do spend entirely too much time, like, just lingering on this.
I disagree. It was just the right amount of time.
And then the going back and forth with the Dynasty Warriors, only one person can attack me at any one time, like the choreography or whatever.
Oh yeah, the fight choreography is a treat.
Jeez.
So this is going back, like, way back to Benny the incel. One of my favorite parts is when the two run into each other, the two groups, like Buffy's group and Benny and Pike, sort of run into each other at Café Blase, which was probably sort of like the prototype of the Bronze in the TV show.
That's a great name.
And they try to hit on Buffy and her friends, and it's not working. And in, you know, true sort of like just shitty dude fashion, you know, they have ordered like a hot dog to eat. And Benny is like, "Hey, Buffy, I got something for you." And he, you know, puts the like hot dog kind of over his junk and like holds it out for Buffy. And she just like raises one eyebrow, grabs like a butter knife and slices it in half. And everybody's just like...
Which, like, this is great, because not only is it a great gag and a great dig at Benny as a shitty character, but also it's early enough in the movie that this is Buffy's first demonstration of Slayer powers.
Yeah, of Slayer powers, but also of just, like, not taking shit from people. Like, she clearly is... has got some chops, you know?
I mean, what better way of showing that this is a feminist film than cutting a
jerk's dick off.
Yeah. in by proxy. Anyway, well, let's go ahead and move on to the dessert round, which is where we talk about if and how this has influenced us in the past and how it might continue to now.
What are our takeaways from this glorious film?
Well, for me, I grew up with this film. And it's probably, like, again, it was super duper hammy. But it did have a lot of sort of feminist messages that, even though I was, like, a kid and I didn't really, like, pick up on a lot, I think that still kind of, like, seeped into my skull and somewhat informed my writing early. But, you know, like most writers, my early works had a lot of, like, self-inserts. But there was, like, a few years, like, there was a good, I don't know, like, maybe 5 or 10 year period of time where I didn't watch Buffy. So there's this big gap between me watching it as a kid and then me watching it as probably a college-age adult. And definitely as an adult, I absorbed way more of what was going on. And it really did kind of make me think about how I wanted to, I don't know, what I wanted to say.
How you wanted to portray women.
Yeah, how I wanted to portray women and, like, sort of the diversity, the many different kinds of ways that you can write heroines. Which, speaking of which, we didn't even get to this in the earlier part, but this is a great example of the heroine's journey. I mean, like, this is a super campy example, but, like, she does go through the whole, you know, having this sort of, like, ultra feminine experience, then kind of being introduced to the masculine, and then having this training montage glow up, learning those skills or whatever, and then having this shock that makes her want to go back to the existence that she had before, and then the event that makes her integrate the two and transcend just this, like, either, you know, very classically feminine or classically masculine kind of role. So anyway, but, like, for me, yeah, I really enjoyed the movie as a kid because, you know, everything was just so over the top. But as an adult, I appreciated the other kinds of themes that were going on underneath the surface.
Well, my takeaway is it's okay to be goofy. And it's especially okay to be goofy as an adult.
Hell yeah.
You know what? If I'm, like, pushing about 65, 70, and I am cast as this elder vampire, I'm going to take inspiration from this man.
From Rutger Hauer.
I am going to my thrift stores. I'm going to find the most elaborately bad curtain and wear it.
Why wait till you're 65, Mitch?
Do it now.
Do it now. Live your truth.
I mean, theoretically, I could pass as a 65-year-old man.
No, you could not. What a lie.
But yes, I'm just going to try and live the campiest I can.
I think that is a great thing to take away from this movie.
Honestly, my takeaway isn't that different from Mitch's. So when I do write, I write comedy. And, oh Lord.
In a stark contrast to me.
Yes, in a stark contrast to Jess's work. If you've
or drama.
If you've encountered any of her work, and you should if you haven't, I stand in stark contrast where she leans heavily into the drama and the horror.
With a light bit of comedy.
And a little bit of comedy. Whereas I lean into the comedy with the occasional dash of surprising horror. But this movie is a treasure trove on how to study excellent comedic timing. It's got camp humor. It's got witty dialogue. It's got very broadly written but recognizable character tropes. Like, intro to comedy, this is a great study piece, I think. Just because it's so fun.
Yeah.
So that is my takeaway from this movie.
Yeah. I feel like you've definitely drawn inspiration. You know, it's filled the creative well a bit for you.
Yeah, it's very pacey, like snappy. I love it.
Added to the creative compost.
Yes. The loamy earth of my brain.
Yes. But yeah. Okay, well, I think, dinner is winding down to a close. It's time to pick up the dishes and do the washing.
Clear the table.
Yeah, clear the table, do the washing. But we had a great time here talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer 1992.
Please watch this movie.
Yes, if you haven't watched this movie, please watch this movie. If you have watched this movie, please reach out to us. Our social media links will be in the show bio. I would love to hear what you guys think and how it maybe has influenced you in whatever way it has influenced you if you've seen it before. I would just honestly love to talk to people about this movie because I am outside of my family, I have not met a single other person who even knows this movie exists and has ever seen it. So,
and if you want to tickle me in particular, find us on social media and let us know which of the outfits in this movie do you want to wear.
Yes.
Does anybody want to wear the Ska Vampires outfit
from the DJ stand? Ska Vampire! Yes!
Or just, Merrick's attire.
Yeah, all of his
Honestly,
outfits.
I want to wear every single one of Buffy's looks.
Yeah.
Every single one was awesome.
That dress.
That dress at the end. Yeah, the dance
especially
dress.
with the jacket.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is also echoed in season 1, the season 1 finale of the TV show.
Yeah, you've got white wedding-esque dress, white Doc Martens, and a black leather jacket.
It's yes. So thank you for joining us for this segment of Media Morsels, and we will be back next week with another tasty treat to offer up to you, and we'd love it if you would stop on by. We'll save you a seat.
Let's wait for a couple of seconds. That be end.